and make sure you become attentive and grab all the points that I'm going to say about this, because an ID50 is very crucial, right? A recap: we spoke about the MMM cycle, we spoke about the levels, we spoke about the ADR, we spoke about the possible reset, we spoke about the continuation, we spoke about identifying peak formations at 800 EMA, we spoke about shark fin at 4 hour extreme levels at first leg, we spoke about counting the number of days, we spoke about a multi-days peak formations, we spoke about counting ADR and levels, right? So now that we know how to identify the peak formation, there are cases whereby there is you miss the peak formation. Remember, our rule is that we enter at the second leg. Now, let's say you missed the peak formation, or you missed this peak formation, and now you want to know where do you enter next. This is then what I'm going to say. There are only 4 types of trades. Only 4 types of trades. Don't trade anything that is not any of these 4. Type number 1 is peak. We have already spoken about it and its identification. Type number 2, it's ID50. Type number 3, it's safety trade. Type number 4 is peak reset. So I've written them exactly in the way they form their sequence. This is exactly how they form. So if you miss the peak, catch the ID50. If you miss the ID50, catch the safety trade. If you miss the safety trade, you gotta wait for a new peak to form and maybe a possible reset if it does. Now, what is an ID50? An ID50 is the first pullback to the 50 EMA from the peak. An ID50 is the first pullback to the 50 EMA from the peak. So in other words, it means we have a peak, then we have a pullback. It will mean that maybe our 50 EMA is moving right there. I hope this is clear. An ID50 is the first pullback to the 50 EMA from the peak. So there is no ID50 without a peak. There is no ID50 without a 50 EMA. So these are the conditions. It has to be there. There has to be a peak. There has to be a 50 EMA for us to talk about the first pullback to the 50 EMA from the peak. So in other words, we are simply saying that the dealer has trapped enough people. The dealer has trapped enough people, then he begins to move away, right? So he then pulls back to the 50 EMA. So let's say you failed to catch this second leg, and then you see that pullback. You can catch the pullback as your ID50. So in other words, you'll be trading the ID50 because you missed the peak, or you could have seen the peak, caught it, traded it, and then you see in ID50, you add positions. I don't know if that makes sense. You add positions. Now, what I want to emphasize is that an ID50 forms at different places on time frames. I always ask people why, and they always fail to give me the correct answer. The reason why they form at different places, remember that inverse chart we spoke about when we said that 800 EMA on M15 is 200 EMA on H1 is 50 EMA on H4 is 13 EMA on D1. So meaning that an ID50 of H4, it means on H1 it will be on 200 EMA, right? On M15 it will be on 800 EMA. While list on H4 it will be an ID50, right? Let's go and have a look. Let's take for instance, I need somewhere where there is only 50 EMA and no 200 EMA so that it becomes clear. Okay, let's take for instance, this is our peak formation. Then we have the ID50 there, which is the first pullback to the 50 EMA. Remember, the 50 EMA is the light blue one. So as far as our peak is concerned, this is the first pullback to the 50 EMA. So if you go to H1, you realize that that 50 EMA is actually the 200 EMA. Check it out. That 50 EMA is actually the 200 EMA. Remember what I said? I said that the position of the 50 EMA on H4 is actually the position of the 200 EMA on H1. So it means that the ID50 of H1 is actually a pullback to the 200 EMA on M15. It means the ID50 of D1 is actually a pullback to the 200 EMA of H4. Can you see that? So simple. That's the reason why we said that these ID50s will not form on the same position for all time frames. So in conclusion, this means that from forming our peak, we will have an ID50 of M1, ID50 of M5, ID50 of M15, ID50 of H1, ID50 of H4, ID50 of D1, ID50 of W1, ID50 of month 1. Why? Because the 50 EMA is moving in different positions. The 50 EMA is moving in different positions because the 50 EMA here is actually we don't have a less than minute time frame, but some brokers do have seconds time frames, etc. But we are simply saying that the 50 EMA on H1 here is actually the 200 EMA on M15. The 50 EMA on H4 is the 200 EMA on H1. 50 EMA on D1, 200 EMA on H4. 50 EMA on W1, 200 EMA on D1. That's the reason why that day I said where there is an ID50 of H1, that's actually a safety trade of M15. We are going to talk about it once we get to the safety trade. But this is exactly what happens with ID50. It forms at different positions in respect with the time frames and the positions of the 50 EMA. I hope that makes sense. So always know that an ID50 is the first pullback to the EMA50 from the peak. If you look at the peak that I'm seeing right there, this is the first pullback. That is the ID50 of H1. That is the ID50 of H1. If we are to open M15 and go there where we placed our box, unfortunately that's an older date, so my broker might not give me the details. So maybe let me try and look for another example that is a bit closer, so that we can get a clear example. Okay, let's try and change a pair. I hopefully think my network is better now. Right. This is a peak formation. It means the ID50 of H1 is this one, because that's the first pullback to the 50 EMA from the peak. If we come to M15, you realize that on M15 time frame you do not have an ID50. There is no pullback right here. There is no pullback to the EMA50 right here. If you go to M5, let's hope they will allow us to open. You realize that from M5 you also don't have an ID50. If you go to M1, I don't know if they are going to give us the data. They won't. Anyway, the first pullback to the EMA50 then becomes our ID50. If we come to H4, my network is so slow. If we come to H4, maybe right here, you realize that this is our peak, then you realize that this is our ID50. So in other words, first of all, identify the peak. Secondly, identify the EMA, then you identify the pullback. Look at that one. There is another ID50 there. Peak, dealer moves away, then comes back and pulls to the 50. You see that? So the dealer moved away, came back up to the 50 EMA and pulled away. So that becomes our ID50. So that's basically all about the ID50. So on the ID50, you can see it on M15 intraday. You can see it on peak formations, proper peak formations, whereby if you miss the peak, you can catch the ID50, or on intraday M15, you miss the HOD, you catch the ID50. Sometimes you can see it on bigger time frames, monthly time frame, daily time frame, etc, etc, etc. So the pullback to the 50 EMA becomes the ID50. That is our second type of trade. So if you miss the peak, or if you get the peak, an ID50 is a position